Life-threatening bleeding or hemorrhage requires immediate attention and treatment. Life-threatening hemorrhage can lead to death within minutes if the bleeding is not stopped. If the casualty is suffering from life-threatening blood loss via the limbs, use a tourniquet to stop the bleeding and control the hemorrhage. A tourniquet is basically a tight binding that cuts off blood flow and stops life-threatening bleeding. Cautionary note: a tourniquet is never to be used for wounds on the head, neck, or torso, which would cut off circulation to the brain and vital organs. Commercial tourniquets may have their own specific instructions, but they generally follow similar guidelines. While preparing the tourniquet, use direct pressure or apply a pressure point to immediately slow down the bleeding and begin controlling the hemorrhage. Apply the tourniquet approximately 2 to 3 inches above the hemorrhaging wound of the arm or leg. Ideally, it should be placed directly on the skin, but if there is potential danger at the scene or other factors that prevent proper treatment, placing the tourniquet over clothing may be adequate. Do not place a tourniquet on a joint, below the knee on the shin, or below the elbow on the forearm. The bones of the shins and forearms can splint the hemorrhaging blood vessels and make it impossible to control the bleeding. Apply the tourniquet tightly enough to block life-threatening blood flow. This may be very painful for a conscious casualty, but do not stop tightening until the hemorrhage is controlled. Once the tourniquet is applied, check to make sure that there is no pulse on the limb. If a pulse is present, that means the tourniquet is not tight enough. Tighten it further until there is no pulse on the limb. Generally, the bigger the limb, the tighter the tourniquet must be, so the leg will require more pressure to control bleeding than the arm. Once the scene is safe, reassess the tourniquet's application. Ensure that the tourniquet is placed 2 to 3 inches above the wound, directly on the skin. After application, leave the tourniquet exposed at all times that it's applied. It may be necessary to use more than one tourniquet to control severe bleeding. If needed, a second tourniquet should be applied just above the first, that is, closer to the heart along the limb. If possible, try to maintain a record of when you applied the tourniquet and keep that record with the casualty if and when they are evacuated. Remember that a life-threatening bleed that is located on the head, neck, or torso cannot be treated with a tourniquet. Such injuries may require the combined use of hemostatic blood clotting gauze, direct pressure, and pressure dressings to control the bleeding. Non-life-threatening wounds should also be treated with this combination. The steps for using these techniques are outlined in a separate video.